As the next stage of the coup that's happening in the United States under Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Pete Hegseth, and Elon Musk, they just did a loyalty test where Donald Trump himself said if somebody doesn't like it, will fire him on the spot. They reunite every single major general in the United States in one location, which is a high risk, high security risk. J.D. Vance has spent for 60 plus minutes doing speeches, but there is one statement that he mentioned that goes against everything that all the evidence is required in the field of the sciences, math, and philosophy, and even the humanities. That is morality and pacifism. He did a classic George Orwell 1984 statement, war is peace, peace is war. He said that pacifism is naive and goes against history. He clearly never did any basic research, never did a single study about metaethics and moral ontology. All evidence point in the neuroscience of morality, the anthropology of morality, the sociology, the neuroscience, the evolutionary biology, the psychology, the cognitive science, the anthropology, archaeology of morality, and even game theory. All evidence point that humans, as we evolved, were not war hungers. In fact, we started off as warless, non-violent, very anarchist way of view, and for 95% of human history. In fact, there is such a thing called peaceful societies, where war and violence are practically unknown. We have an entire encyclopedia studying these societies all over the world. Hierarchy was the correlation of violence. Before 12,000 years ago, because that's around the time of hierarchy was first established. Before that, every single human death globally, only 3% of all human deaths were violent deaths. Only after hierarchy was established 12,000 years ago, between 12,000 years ago and the establishment of Sumer, the first state ever, that 3% raised to 15% of violent deaths. In fact, there's been studies in universities that show out of the all animals in the world, and specifically mammals, because we are mammals, humans are not even in the top 30 of the most violent animals in the world. Less than 2% of all humans were caused by other humans by means of homicide. In fact, the most violent mammal in the world is a meerkat. Around 30% of all meerkat deaths are resulted by other meerkats. In fact, given his own personal history of sex crimes, he conveniently ignored that the military and the police are the biggest contributors of crime. For example, in a study by the Center of Foreign Affairs that has concluded that around 35% of the U.S. military operation population, and that's only the active duty, that's ignoring the National Guard and the Reserve, and etc., that 35% have openly expressed fascist views. To be more specific, white nationalism, white separatism, and white supremacy. Around 3 to 5% of the US military population are members of domestic terrorist organizations. The two biggest ones are the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, who the only way to join these two organizations, you have to be either in the military or the police, either actively employed or retired from it. And one of the more recent the terrorist attacks that happened since Trump's presidency mostly happened by former military personnel. The deadliest terrorist attack besides 9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing, was caused by a veteran. The 1996 Olympic bombing also caused by a terrorist. There are many instances where the most deadliest terrorist attacks in American history were caused by former military personnel. Studies have even shown that approximately one-third of U.S. veterans report a lifetime of history of arrest, a higher rate than the general population. And those extremist terrorist attacks committed by the U.S. military, we often classify either violent or non-violent terrorist aggression. 52% are classified as violent, with sexual assault being one of the more common crimes committed by the military, including Pete Hegseth, who he himself has committed multiple sex crimes. And like I said, many of them support fascist views. Pete Hegseth himself had expressed fascist views. The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, has openly expressed fascist views. In fact, he even promoted a book called Inhuman, published by a notorious neo-Nazi. Or what about the police? There are many police that they have their own gangs for the purpose of committing hate crimes. Infamously, in California, to be more specific, Los Angeles had notorious for this phenomenon. People forget that the police are useless. They don't do any fix or solve crime. In fact, the Supreme Court has ruled that the police has no duty to protect the people. The police has break the law regularly throughout all 50 states and colonies. In fact, like the good example of somebody actually trying to do a good thing, doing a goody two shoes, most of the police would destroy their lives. The most famous example would be the guy who prevented the 1996 Olympic bombing, Jerry. Like he did a good thing, but because he's considered like the Pooh's 32 shoes, they ruin his life. It shows you that the FBI and the police and even the military don't do their job. In fact, they're useless for the thing they are supposed to do. The police, and by extension the military, are notorious for fabricating evidence, falsifying evidence, and use the means of torture or other means to convince innocent people of doing crimes they did not commit. And there's a tradition among the police force that they commit crimes so often, but they can get away with it because they are cops and they get help by other cops. 1/3 of all crimes committed by the police are assaults, and a significant number of those crimes besides that were sex crimes. And 50% of police officer homes are guilty of domestic abuse. Again, domestic assault and sex crimes are the two most common crimes committed by the police. And the third most common crime they commit, and the one that gets arrested the least, is lying under oath. In fact, it is so common they even have their own term for this phenomenon. They call it testifying. That even in the state of New York, which has the highest budget for police in the United States, has a secret database of police officers who constantly lie under oath all the time, but they still get away with it. And lying under oath is so common, and they usually do it to get somebody convicted of a crime they did not commit for racist, sexist, or any form of bigotry or corruption. In fact, studies show that police only solve 2%. I repeat, the police only solve 2% of all major crimes. The thing they are supposed to do, they're notoriously bad at it. Right? Even the FBI admitted that the root cause of crime is capitalism, which is economic inequality, gentrification, and other forms of economic sabotage, economic violence committed by the rich and the powerful. The reason they don't get consequences of their action because they make it legal for them to do it. And like I said, all studies show that non-violent approach is more effective than violent approach. Again, the very existence of peaceful society in many cultures around the world, they know how to solve violence without resorting to military, police, or other forms of violent coercion. Indigenous cultures all around the world. Again, I will put a shit ton of sources in the description that shows you that P has no understanding of meta-ethics and moral ontology, and his statement about pacifism is scientifically wrong, false. This is the same man who, while he was in university, had published articles defending sexual assault if the woman is unconscious. That it's not considered assault if the woman or the victim is unconscious. He said that, by the way. There are many cases in his book, especially his book about American warfare. His second ever book. The first book is about speeches, how romanticizing Teddy Roosevelt being an ass kicker. It's just talk about the guy he's a fan of. Nothing interesting. But his second book, where he truly expressed his philosophy, if you want to call it that, is a notorious, violent, misogynistic sexist who, by his own admission, want to ignore the Geneva Convention so we can do war crimes and genocides and crimes against humanity without consequences, with the president who submitted himself that he described right-wing extremists as, and I quote, very fine people. The same man who wants to legalize torture because he said it works, even though all studies have shown that it does not work at all. In fact, every time they say they committed something under torture, 9 times out of 10 they either lie about it or they believe their own lies, not based on any truth at all. Again, I gotta put in the description a lot of source material to show you why police, military, and violence is not only work, it goes against how humans evolve. We evolve as non hierarchical, non violent species.